I'm Michael, and welcome to Beyond the Screenplay. Today we are talking about The Dark Knight, the 2008 film directed by Christopher Nolan, screenplay by Jonathan Nolan and Christopher Nolan. I'm joined by the Lessons from the Screenplay team, Trisha Arand.
Hello, everyone.
Brian Bittner.
Hello, hello.
And Alex Calleros.
Hi.
So this is obviously part 2 in our trilogy of episodes on the Dark Knight trilogy from Christopher Nolan. And it's The Dark Knight, so just I feel like we have to say that again. And so there are so many things to talk about with this movie, obviously, from structural things to Heath Ledger as the Joker to just Batman and the cultural moment that happened when this came out.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like I kind of just need to please the gods or whatever. The gods of the first viral video for Lessons from the Screenplay.
I was like, where is he going with this sentence?
Kind of
the gods of
YouTube.
Yeah.
Yes, the YouTube gods. There we go. The reason pretty much that we're all here, which is The Dark Knight was the 6th video that I made for Lessons from the Screenplay, and it went super viral and has always been and will probably always continue to be the most popular video on the channel. And there's so many memories. I went back and rewatched it before recording this, and I just have so many memories making that video, and a lot of formal things that I think still persist today came from that video, but also a lot of things have changed. Listening to my voiceover is very painful, more so than normal. What was cool is just remembering how excited I was when I decided to do a video about The Dark Knight and the Antagonist and finding all that information and just seeing it all come together and being really, really excited about it personally, and then seeing the world be excited about it also was a very exciting experience, and I still feel that when I watch it ultimately. So
that's awesome.
Congratulations, Michael.
Anyway, memories. Thank you. But so The Dark Knight is really, really great. And
yes, it is.
You don't say.
As I was rewatching it, I tweeted something that was like, The Dark Knight is maybe the best example of a movie that's greater than the sum of its parts. And I think a lot of people took that to be like a dig against the movie, which I don't quite understand.
Well, it kind of sounds like a dig, like maybe its parts kind of suck.
Right. But I think what you're saying is the parts are all good. The movie is even better.
It's great, yeah. But I do think that the movie has some weird parts. Like, there are some goofy things, and we kind of talked about that in Batman Begins episode, where there are these kind of weird, goofy moments that in isolation, I feel like are weird and not that strong, but it doesn't detract from the greater sum of what this movie becomes. So, I want to hear from you guys and also hear just what your guys' experience was watching this for the first time, because this is one of those movies that I remember very much where I was sitting in the theater even when I saw it. Brian, I want to hear from you. What was your first experience with The Dark Knight?
Well, first of all, let me say my last experience watching it in a theater, which was the last movie I've seen in a theater.
Whoa.
I saw it, on March 8th at a movie palace downtown, and that was the last movie I saw in a theater.
That's a really good last movie in a theater.
Yeah, it definitely was.
It's a good selection.
But no, as we talked about last week, I was a fan of Batman Begins, and then I was definitely following Dark Knight through its progress and stuff, and then it was like Heath Ledger ? And then they released the first picture, and it was like, okay, Heath Ledger ! And which is funny because Interstellar, I had a kind of a similar thing where I was like, Matthew McConaughey in a Christopher Nolan movie, that's weird. And then True Detective and Dallas Buyers Club came out in the time between the announcement and Interstellar. I was like, oh hell yes, this guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the only downside for me was just how much of the movie was released online, and because I have no chill, I just watched all of the clips they released. There's the entire prologue, and then the we are tonight's entertainment, that whole where's Harvey Dent scene, and just a bunch of sequences that were released online. And I was like, well, of course I'm going to watch these. I'm going to watch them many times. So when I saw the movie, I was like, yeah, I've seen 20% of this already, which is a weird feeling.
That is dangerous to go down that rabbit hole of watching all the promotional content, because you do start to puzzle together the film in advance in a way that takes away from that first experience.
But yeah, I liked it a lot the first time, and then saw it again in the theater within the next probably 2 weeks, and then was able to sort of take it all in because there's so much going on in this movie. So it was one of those second and third viewings is when I really went, okay, this is great, and have seen it many times since and love it.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Alex, what was your experience?
So I think I saw it for the first time actually when I was visiting home in Arizona. I saw it at like a bigger than average but not IMAX theater. Like it was like it was called the Cine Capri in Tempe, Arizona, and it has like a big screen, but it's like a widescreen. So it was a normal aspect ratio. So I saw it the first time and I was mostly just overwhelmed, like because this movie has so much in it. I just remember kind of leaving the theater in a daze because I was just like I remember feeling like, wow, that movie was way darker than I thought it would be. It took me to places that were like, they're doing this, they're really doing this. Like that was my main impression, was like, holy crap, like this superhero movie, even beyond Batman Begins, went there with a lot of stuff that I didn't expect. And so I just was kind of like overwhelmed. And then I saw it again in IMAX.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when like this movie had my heart forever, because when it just cut to that opening scene and it's just like the full, because also in Arizona they have like one of the bigger IMAX screens in Tempe. They have like the full like Science Center, like big square screen, not like a Limax screen. And seeing it in that, I was just like, yes, this is like, I've been waiting for like a blockbuster, narrative film to make use of this technology in this way. I've never seen this before. I'd never, like, there've been movies blown up onto IMAX, like The Matrix, like Reloaded was like re-put into theaters in IMAX, but it was just like blown up. It wasn't shot in IMAX. And here was an opening sequence, and then following that, other key sequences that were truly shot in IMAX, and it was just an incredible experience. And so, yeah, that was when my like brain was blown by just like, this is a new type of cinematic experience that I didn't know I could have, and I want more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Overwhelmed is exactly the word. Oh boy. So I actually don't remember my first time seeing this in theaters. I think I did see it twice. And then, it's one of these movies where like, I'm sure roommates or whoever had it on DVD and we would like put it on and watch it. And the amount that this movie really, really upsets me in like a good way is a lot. Like,
yeah,
I find this movie to be profoundly disturbing. Like, it's really upsetting to me to watch it. Every single one, and I want to get into this more later, but every single one of the choices that the Joker forces people to make is horrifying. Like, from the minute that he like walks on screen and he's like having every one of his minions in the bank robbery kill each other in this like domino effect very callously. And then it goes into the scene where he's like, you could either hire me or I'm going to blow you all up, in the like gangster scene. The one that then I just didn't know what to do about is where he like has those guys try to fight it out with a pool cue, like a broken pool cue, to figure out.
We're having tryouts.
Only one of you can be my next henchman.
Aggressive expansion.
Everything about this has just gotten so thoroughly under my skin that, like, while it's a movie that I couldn't possibly respect more, like, it's an undertaking. It's like not to be sat down and watched lightly.
No, it is not. It's a lot.
Not at all. Lots and lots of people die in incredibly horrifying ways, and just the like nail biting kind of like fist clenching experience of watching people make the most difficult choices they'll ever make in their whole lives is awful. And when I was watching it this time, I was both so impressed by it, because I like had my analyst hat on, because I was like, I have to podcast about this. I was both so impressed by it, but again, yet so overwhelmed by the psychological, like, power of it, that I wanted to cry for most of the time that I was watching it. And I've seen this movie probably 12 times, yes, I don't know how to convey fully the effect that this movie has on me, but it's unbelievable. I don't know.
I feel like it's weird, because to me this movie, like all those things you're saying are completely true, but also this is one of the most fun movies to watch for me. And like maybe this is also my like, I watched The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo like for fun also. So
Yeah,
like
no.
maybe I'm like
Right,
twisted
right.
in like
And like
interesting
Seven,
ways.
like you
Right.
love
Oh my
Seven.
God, Seven is so. We can
Whereas
talk
like
about
I don't know
Seven
if I
later,
can
too.
watch Seven.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh my God, it's so good. I remember, again, this was one of those times where I remember where I was seated because there was all this hype and then, just all the things that happened before the movie came out. And so it was like, okay, there's going to be another Batman movie. I kind of like Batman Begins. Let's see what this is about. And then, the hype with the Joker and honestly, the intro scene to me still doesn't really work. The bank heist, like I think it's fine, but I feel like the rest of the movie is so much better. Like there's just mechanics happening that I don't know, something about it feels weird. The school bus pulls out and like falls into it. Like
That's
it
a little
starts-
weird.
right?
No other school bus driver was like, "Hey, a
Hang
school bus
on.
just pulled out of a bank covered in rubble." And
Yeah, right.
So like, there's kind of weird things, but then I remember seeing the Joker come on screen for the first time when he comes into that room with the
Yes.
mob bosses
Mhm.
and he makes the pencil disappear.
Yeah.
Like
Hate it. I hate it.
it's so good. Like I remember feeling like, oh, something special is happening, and then it was one of those experiences.
Something especially awful is happening.
It's the going there that I was talking about.
Exactly.
Where it's
Yeah.
like, oh, this movie, it's like, I'll let you finish, Michael. Sorry, but basically, it's the Joker from the beginning is like the most ruthless, unpredictable, like kind of terrifying antagonist, and they're not gonna like play around. Like,
Mhm.
Right.
No.
And
Yeah.
it doesn't stop. Like
No.
at
Right,
no
it
point
builds.
is the Joker less than perfect in this movie, and that's
Mhm.
just
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, and so we can talk about the Joker. There's also kind of getting at that darkness thing though, and the disturbing aspect of it. It was kind of only later, there was again so much hype. I remember seeing it in IMAX and being at the Sony Metreon in San Francisco. And it was just like the Saturday after it came out, we're like, let's go see it again. And just like swarms of people. Like I'd never seen that many people in a theater just like hyped about a thing. But then weeks afterward, reflecting on it and talking to some friends, I realized that it's very much like a post 9/11 movie. Like it's a movie
Yeah.
about
Mhm.
terrorism. And I
Yep.
think that's so much of what makes it disturbing and uncomfortable is because it forces both Batman and the audience to think about these choices that are unthinkable choices and having to wrestle with what do you do in
Yeah.
these impossible situations. And it's just thematically and cinematically amazing.
Right. The idea of the Joker isn't, you don't get a nice backstory. You don't get like he just wants to watch the world burn, like that kind of thing is uncomfortable. It's not the thing that that we want to hear. And yeah, so Trisha, what you were saying, like it's an undertaking. When we talked about our favorite movies of the decade, your rubric, Trisha, was like, I just want to watch these movies all the time.
Mhm.
And for me, it was more like, what is my experience watching them? And I had the same experience recently playing The Last of Us Part 2, which was just like, I'm so upset, but then also like so emotional in like positive and negative ways. And I just feel like it's like such an emotional undertaking, but it's so much more unforgettable for me than for a movie that's just like a lot of fun to watch, and obviously like there are movies that are like Shawshank Redemption is a good example of a movie that's like, it's emotional and it's like long, but it's just like enjoyable to watch in a way that something like Seven is not, or The Dark Knight is not. But I
Michael's shaking his head.
but I do just appreciate. Yeah, I'm not saying like you can watch movies in like two different ways almost. You can just sort of put it on and like look at the colors, and then you can actually like sit down and let yourself be overwhelmed by all of the like disturbing stuff that's going on and be like, okay, like I think Seven's a beautiful movie, and that's a movie I feel like I could watch all the time too. But like again, it's not fun in the way that we are using that word.
No.
But anyway, point of all of what I'm saying is that like I do appreciate movies that can do that, even if they are movies that you want to watch all the time. They're movies that when you do sit down with them, they are going to take you somewhere that is just incredibly powerful.
I will say about The Dark Knight, it is a movie I could watch all the time because it's such a ride. I think it's kind of the beginning of a thing we've been talking about a lot, of just this Christopher Nolan momentum that is so unstoppable. I mean, it's in Batman Begins as well, and it's in all his films, but this film in particular sustains like a continuous momentum.
Oh yeah.
For like, I mean, how long is it? It's over 2.5 hours, right?
2.5 hours, I think.
Yeah, or about that.
Yeah.
It never lets up. There's never a moment where you can really breathe, or you kind of feel like, oh, it's kind of slowing down, or it's relentless. And what's impressive to me is that the stakes and the challenges are just so continuously ratcheted up so brilliantly that it works. Like, you are on the edge of your seat because it actually is getting worse, and you actually don't know how they're going to get out of this next situation the Joker is creating. And to sustain that for that long is just unbelievable. And so that's why, for me, it is an enjoyable watch, even though there's some legitimately disturbing stuff in here. I'm just thrilled by the experience of a thing like keeping me going for that long.
Right.
I kind of can't believe it.
Well, yeah, he does this thing. Nolan does this thing in the first 20 minutes that I sort of refer to as like incidental filmmaking. I don't know, or incidental cinematography, where it's like the camera is like panning past a building, and then you go inside the building and two characters are talking, and then they say 3 lines to each other, and then we cut to now we're in a different town or part of Gotham, and like there's 2 other characters, and the camera just sort of keeps moving, and it never lets you. So it's not, in a 2.5 hour movie, there's not like, well, I can go to the bathroom now because everything is kind of settled,
right?
And obviously there are longer scenes, there are more settled scenes in the movie, there are moments of respite, but after the heist, there's about, I would say, 20 minutes where it just keeps going and just keeps introducing, here's all the characters, here's where they are, here's a few lines, and we're just going to keep going. And it weirdly, like the cinematography, the way it keeps moving like that, helps keep it from feeling like overwhelming, because they're just like, it's like I'm on a train and I'm just watching these like little scenes go by.
Right.
Because there's a disjointed version of this where it's because I have seen films that kind of try to just have this like relentless pace.
Right.
And I tune out most of the time because it's like, well, I'm kind of exhausted by this. And I think this movie, by the end, pushes my limits. Like when it gets to like Batman using sonar vision, like, and it's so disorienting. That's usually where I'm like, okay, like my brain is starting, like my head's hurting a little bit now.
Right.
Like, get out of the sonar vision, please. But besides like that little qualm, like most movies that try to be this relentless, I think I would have fatigue, I would tune out, I'd be kind of just not into it. And somehow, because the cinematography, the editing, the music, I'm with it, which is just, I just can't believe that he pulled that off.
I fully agree, and I think part of it is exactly the filmmaking that you just touched on, Bri, which is the movement of the camera. So if you think about that opening shot, even just the opening shot of it that's coming in on the building, oh my God. Yeah, but then the way that the camera is continuously sort of like pushing in, like there's so many just like tracking shots in on things, and then sideways and everything, as you were just talking about. I think it's that. I think it's also that the stakes always feel real and grounded.
Yep.
So like, even as things are going along, and as you're saying, Alex, they're like ratcheting up, they're getting worse and worse. They never feel too big.
Right.
They always feel infinitely possible. And I will never, ever forgive Christopher Nolan for killing Rachel Dawes in the middle of this movie in that exact way that he does. It made me so mad when I first saw it because it wounded me so deeply. But the way that her hair blows right in front of her face,
and she's about to start saying something like,
it's so maniacal. It's so brutal, which is what is great about it. It's just so brutally honest, and
we've seen a lot of people die at that point. Like a lot of characters that have lines, that have names. We've seen them die. The Joker kills them. But then that one is the one that really, I think you need it for the stakes in the second half.
Yep.
You need to know that this is real. People really close to you, the audience, and close to Bruce are potentially going to die here. There's like, not everybody is getting out of this. In fact, maybe not a lot of people are getting out of this. And I think that's what keeps me hooked into the movie. I mean, I also am just too empathetic, which is why I can't from the very first scene. But especially that second half, when like even to the moment where Harvey is holding Gordon's son, I'm like, this kid could die. This kid could die. because this movie didn't save me from anything else.
Right.
So why would it save me from having to watch this?
Right.
Like the Joker is the ultimate antagonist. Like it's just
Yes.
true because it's, so the movie is relentless, like you guys are saying, but it's not, there's dynamics, which Trisha, you always point out, like it's not just beating over the head constantly. It's always moving somewhere and things are seeming like they're getting better and then get worse and back and forth. But the Joker is dangerous in a way that means he's completely unpredictable. Like his thing is like you don't know what he's going to do next,
right?
Because he doesn't have a plan. So the relentlessness and the momentum that the film has, it doesn't wear on you because you don't know where you're going. Sometimes you can see where it's all going to end, and it's like, okay, let's just get there then.
Finish the final battle, like punch each other some more. Okay, like.
Right. And I think you don't know that with the Joker, and that's like his whole thing. And then I think the filmmaking on kind of a meta level adopts some of that Jokerness, where the filmmaking doesn't let you feel safe either. And that moment with Rachel is such a great moment where the film tricks us. Like, we're with Batman, we think Batman's going to save Rachel. I mean, unless you're some of the people in the YouTube comments, but
they're wrong.
The film clearly states that like Batman is going to see Rachel, and then
he says Rachel,
right?
Like when he asks where he's going,
right?
Yeah.
It's very clear. So the movie tricks us, so we're completely with Batman. Like we feel like we're at the whim of whatever the Joker is going to be doing. And then also the other meta thing I love about the film is that it has this amazing false ending that I completely buy, where after all of that, after Rachel dies, it's kind of like the midpoint, but it could also be kind of the crisis. Like it comes structurally in this weird place where it could be the end of a movie. Like, and the filmmaking is treating it like that, the way the camera's moving, the music, all of it is sort of signaling like Batman didn't win this time, but next time maybe he will, and Harvey Dent's going to be waiting for him. And so I remember being in the theater thinking, wow, okay, I'm so ready for the next movie when it's him versus Two-Face. And then the movie keeps going. And so there's like meta filmmaking things happening that's amplifying the insanity and unpredictability of the Joker. And it just all comes together in such an amazing way. It's just too good.
I will say this, though, about the Joker as a character really quick, which is he is still a character. And by that, I mean, he still has a goal and he pursues his goal in a logical fashion. So it's like his psychology is not something that we relate to, but it is a psychology. There is an internal logic to it. And as you pointed out in the video when you made it, Michael, he's competing for the same goal as Batman. As much as he loves to insist he doesn't have plans, he definitely has a lot of plans.
He has to do a lot of planning for this stuff.
Elaborate plans.
Yeah.
He has to buy makeup. Yes. Like, there's a whole...
It's a lot going on. He's got that nurse's uniform. He had that wig already. He's got plans.
He's got a lot of props. Yeah, handy.
Yeah, so many props. So, but that's the thing is that, like, I think that because so much of who Joker is like shrouded from the characters, like shrouded from Batman, and therefore shrouded from us, they're able to sell us on the idea that and Joker always is insisting that he is chaos. He's an agent of chaos. He doesn't have plans. He's like a dog chasing cars. He definitely has plans. He definitely has goals. He pursues them in a logical fashion. He is a character, and that's why he's a good antagonist. If he were truly lawless in the way that he claims to be, this movie actually would not be fun.
Right.
Because he would fail a lot.
Sure.
Like, that's the thing. His plans go off perfectly because they are plans. So, and if they weren't planned, he would be constantly failing and this movie wouldn't be fun, or it wouldn't be the ride that it is.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, but I think that what makes it terrifying as... from our viewpoint as like civilians in the world is, I might have mentioned this before, but there's a villain on the show Luther who chooses who he's going to kill by like rolling a die and like then like just going like, oh, I rolled this die, I'm going to a gas station, I rolled this die, I'm going to use a hammer, and like so like just random people die because he because that's how he's choosing it. And it's like, yeah, he has a plan, but anybody is susceptible. And I was thinking, and like,
Sure.
apologies, it's going to get like dark for a second, but like when you hear someone was killed down the street from your house because they got in an argument at the convenience store, you're like, oh, well, I could just not get in an argument and I'll be fine. But then when you hear on the other side of the country that like someone just opened fire on people like out of nowhere, that's terrifying because those people it just happened, you know. And I think
it's random.
Right. And I think that's what makes the Joker scary, is that people like the people on the ferry, for instance, are just at risk for no reason. Like they're not trying to stop him, you know. And I think that's the scariest thing.
I think that goes back to the cultural kind of resonance of the film. Is just
Exactly.
it's just this, you know, early 21st century and kind of still just like unease about like, where is the world going? Like, how do you fight a thing like quote unquote terrorism, which is just kind of this like idea or just, you know, and if it's not involving a state or like state actors who are like acting in accordance with like self-interest or some logical goal, how do you fight that? And that's, you know, that's explicitly debated in this movie. Is just, we can fight the mob, they just want money, but like, how do you fight somebody whose only goal is essentially to cause chaos? Because that's a very intangible thing. You can't like cut off their money supply. That they don't care about money.
It dovetails so nicely with the kind of theme that was set up in Batman Begins, where Batman Begins is all about fear, right? As they say many, many times. And this is kind of an interesting evolution of that, of like, not just fear for you as a person, but as like a society. What do we do when there is fear? And I think what's also disturbing about the Joker is that it's, as you were saying, Trisha, there's real psychology happening. And it's just, it's the psychology of someone that isn't bound by the societal norms that we kind of assume everybody has.
Right.
And he's like right in a lot of ways. Like one of my favorite things is his speech to Harvey, where he says, you know, it's all part of the plan. Like if a bunch of like gangbangers die or like soldiers get killed, like no one freaks out because that's part of the plan. We as a society have, we're used to that. It's like, oh yeah, no, that's normal. Those people are like, it's normal when they die. But these other people, even if it's less people and numbers, or, you know, whatever ways we want to try to quantify or qualify these things.
One tiny little mayor.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Then everyone loses their minds. And that's true. It's a weird part of human society. And I think that's just another reason why the Joker is so disturbing and affecting.
Well, I think just like any good antagonist, if they have an ideology or just like a philosophy of life that has a point to it or has some truth in it, that's always more powerful than just like, I'm just genuinely crazy and nothing makes sense. Like the Joker actually is holding a mirror up to society and saying like, would any of you really be as good as you all purport to be if all this safety you've put around yourself was stripped away? And his whole plan is really like, what a brilliant superhero movie bad guy, like evil genius plan is this intangible thing of, what if I cause chaos in the right places in this metropolis to just show everybody who they really are, which is like, when the chips are down, you're all going to turn on each other. You're all going to rip each other apart because you're just barely holding together this kind of farce of a civilized society. What a brilliant, like, what a much more chilling and relatable and powerful plan than like, I randomly want to blow up this place for some reason.
This sort of Lex Luthor, like, I'm going to buy a lot of real estate, just you wait.
Right.
Yeah.
And this was also amongst the time where there was a lot of just blue laser beams, or like superhero movies. The villains just had like, there was a big blue laser that they're going to shoot at the world and it's going to be bad. And you got to stop them from turning on the blue laser.
Yeah. That reminds me of what I was talking about in Batman Begins, which is that these are wisely scaled.
Right.
They're about Gotham very specifically. And you point that out too, Michael, in the video about The Dark Knight, which is that the climax is about a couple hundred people on the ferry, really. Like, and that's a scale choice, right? Where it's like, here are the lives at risk. They're very contained. We can see them. But I just wanted to emphasize, the reason I bring that up about the Joker is from a character design point of view, which is, I feel like when we are designing our antagonists, we are attracted to psychologies that are dramatically different from our own. And that's a good thing, right? Where we think like, okay, well, I have this value system. What about somebody who has a dramatically different value system. And if they fully committed and believed in their own dramatically different, perhaps incomprehensible to me, but what would the logic behind that look like? That is a really great approach to antagonist design.
Mm-hmm.
What is not a great approach to antagonist design is trying to throw a value system out the window. Your character still has to have a value system.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Like, and it's still like your antagonist still has to have a goal. Take yourself to a psychological place of someone who's really different than you, but someone who still believes in something. And what the Joker believes in is horrifying and it's chaos. And he he believes the worst about everybody. And he wants to show the world that everybody deep down is as terrible as he is, or experiences the darkness that he believes that they do. Like, that's his ideology. It's awful, but it is logical. It does follow an internal logic. And I think that's actually where villains are compelling. Not when they're just acting out at random because you think it would be cool to see them do it.
Sure.
That said, there are movies like Jaws and Alien and Night of the Living Dead.
Ooh, yes, which are good.
Which are good movies where the villain's only goal is just to eat or kill.
Because those aren't people.
Well, exactly. And I think
monster movies.
Right. And I just wanted to clarify that, I
Right.
absolutely agree with everything you said. But then the reason those movies are compelling is because then the movie will explore theme through the characters and through zombies and what they represent in our society, that kind of thing.
Right.
So yeah, just wanted to point that out.
I recently rewatched Twister. Twister's also a great, disaster movies are also a great example of forces we actually can't understand that don't have a psychology, which is always, those are fun, but a different kind.
I mean, there is that moment where the tornado is explaining its plan when he has everyone tied up. Is that? No, maybe that's not Twister. I do have a question about Joker, which is what would happen if nobody got up to stop him when he said, "How about a magic trick?" Would he just have to do a magic trick then?
They'd be like, by all means, go ahead.
It's one of my pet peeves in movies where a line, character A will say something, character B will do something, character A will say something, and the only way the character A's two things work is if B does the exact right thing in that moment, and it comes up again in Dark Knight Rises. This one drives me crazy, which is during the opening sequence where Littlefinger's if I take that mask off, will you die? And he says, it would be extremely painful. And he says, you're a big guy. And he goes, for you. And it's just first of all, it's he's doing stand up in a weird way. But it's also just he's I really hope he says something because otherwise this first line doesn't make any sense.
I'm doing a bit here.
Yeah.
Go along with me.
So I feel like I've brought this up before. I think when we did our Inception live stream for patrons, which people can go watch. But I think I brought up this idea of how I categorize films versus movies.
Ooh.
And that they feel like slightly different things to me. And I feel like what you're saying, Brian, kind of gets at the distinction for me. Whereas I feel like all of these Christopher Nolan movies are movies for that reason. Their primary goal is to be entertaining and fun, and they will throw reality out the window for a cool moment like that if it helps create the fun experience of, the blockbuster thing. And I feel like a film for me has to have a little bit more believability, for lack of a better word, or just, the suspension.
Verisimilitude?
Yeah, there's a different level of suspension of disbelief that's required for a quote unquote film or movie in my head. And so I think what's cool about Christopher Nolan movies is they have so many hallmarks of quote unquote films, but they're applied to the movie thing. So they're just really, really good movies.
Well, because I think if extrapolating out from that small moment with the pencil, most of Joker's plans shouldn't work out. The timing of things has to be so perfect. People have to do the right thing at the right time to make it happen. So yeah, most of his plans are insanely complicated and probably couldn't be pulled off. But we love to watch it, and it's so much fun to see them get it revealed. So who cares, Right.
I'm not complaining. It's just one of those funny things where I was just what would if I only thought about that the last time I watched the movie. I'm what would happen if they're just okay, we'll watch your magic trick. And he's I need a volunteer, I guess. I
mean, I would argue that of all Christopher Nolan's movies, this one maybe exists at the intersection of film and movie.
Mhm.
I don't make that distinction. I don't know how useful it
Right.
is, but I mean, you do you, man. But
I think
like,
it's useful. We'll talk about it more later.
I do think there's something here that is pushing the boundaries of like a popcorn blockbuster
Yeah.
into a place of
Mhm.
art, potentially. Like, it is really trying to comment on something much bigger than itself, or speak to something deep in like human psychology and in, you know, society and sort of particularly Western, and in this case American society. And so I would say, I don't know, this is perhaps a film. And at least it is for me, you know?
It's a spectrum too. I don't think it's black and white.
Well, that's
I think
that's
it's a
the thing.
spectrum.
It's impossible to like find some line between these two arbitrary words that mean the same damn
Seriously.
thing. Like if you're like,
Don't they
Well,
though?
I know what Michael means though, because I think like when I was watching it, and I've thought this before, and it's been said before, but this really just feels like an adult crime thriller that happens to have a superhero in it. What's interesting about the film is that maybe a straight up like, you know, Oscar, you know, Silence of the Lambs, like just like crime thriller might not be able to get away with as many like kind of quirky loopholes in the Joker's plans, or like these kind of like skipping a logical step here and there. Whereas The Dark Knight feels free to kind of like breeze through those moments.
mhm.
Like if The Godfather had magic and like, you know, Corleone magically knew where someone was going to be and like was able to like send a bomb through the mail to arrive there, I feel like that would break something in The Godfather.
Mhm.
Continue.
Anyway, but I do think the movie leans so much like I was watching the first kind of like third of the film, and most of it just felt like it didn't feel like a quote unquote superhero movie at all. Like the way it was shot, the scenes are taking place in like a DA's office, and you know, these like a restaurant and a fundraiser for a political candidate. Like it felt like a really good like adult crime drama,
Mhm.
and like we don't get many of those, and we definitely don't get those with like a huge budget, like a massive budget.
Yeah.
And it's like how cool we like Christopher Nolan managed to get so much money to basically make like an adult movie, which we just don't get
Yeah.
very many of, you know, with this kind of
Yeah,
release
absolutely.
and budget. Yeah.
Well, I love that this movie places a lot of emphasis on Batman as a detective, because
Mhm.
Batman has always been a detective.
Mm.
You know, we were talking in our last podcast about Batman has skills and he has a ton of money, but one of his other like powers from the comic books is that he's a great detective. And so this movie shifts into Batman is going to detect some stuff. And I love those sequences where he like gets the bullet out of the wall and like it doesn't make any sense, but I love it. Listen.
Yeah. Wait. Like what is even going on?
Right. Movie, not film. Movie, not film.
Hold on, because it's like, so he gets the brick. He gets some other bricks that don't have bullets in them. He then takes a big loud
Shoots
gun
bullets into
and
them.
shoots bullets into them.
Mhm.
Like he just chooses some bullets at random. I don't know. He shoots some bullets into it, and then they analyze the way those bullets broke apart.
But there's one brick that's like the right one. He compares bricks before he analyzes it.
Okay, so like I don't. Yeah, was it the same bullet or different bullet? I don't know. And then they put the recreation based on the reality of the bullet explosion, and it shows a fingerprint.
You've got it.
And the Joker knew he would do that because the fingerprint is planted to send him to the place the Joker wants him to go.
That is correct. Listen.
Okay, it's a movie.
It's a movie. Fine. What I'm saying is I like the detecting. I like it when Batman it's really fun to, and you, in the video, Michael, you compared it to Seven, of course, which is like, we're actually, there's a trail being left here. And we're going to follow the clues, which is like classic crime detective fiction kind of stuff. And it's really enjoyable to watch like Batman's skills of like, I'm going to go to this apartment. What I need is the ones that are overlooking the park, right? Like seeing him put pieces together, or like overlooking the parade, seeing him put the pieces together in his brain of, well, this thing leads me to conclude this about the Joker. And like, I think he does at one point manage to find something out about the Joker that the Joker hasn't anticipated. Am I wrong about that? Let me go back through this incredibly complicated plot in my brain.
I think ultimately the Joker knew everything and everything was part of his plan. I think.
Every bit of detecting that Batman does?
I think so.
I mean, the only thing that doesn't go right for him is the fairies don't blow each other up.
Right. I think that's the first time.
Which he expects to happen at exactly midnight somehow. He's like, and here we go.
I do also believe like that is maybe the most objective problem I have with the movie. Objective maybe isn't the right word, but we're talking about all these things where it's this adult movie. It's bringing in these like heavy themes, and it's dealing with how do we deal with terror and like asking these really big questions. And it kind of doesn't really answer them. And like, I can't really hold that against the movie because how do you answer that?
Right.
But it is interesting to me that like neither of the fairies blow each other up. And I
think
it's
kind of a fairy tale ending.
Boo.
No.
You're really
Alex.
bittering up this conversation.
I know.
But and even leading up to that, I feel like there's interesting commentary on, just obviously the selection of one fairy is full of like prisoners, like bad people,
right.
quote unquote, and the rest are like the good people. And then there's commentary on democracy of like,
Let's
should
take
put
a
this
vote.
to a vote.
Yeah.
And
There's no time for a vote.
But it's just interesting that neither one of them blow up the other. I think that's a bold statement from the movie that feels counter to a lot of what else is in the movie, I feel.
Sure. Yeah, it's very optimistic in a way. Like the screwed up thing, the most upsetting thing about the movie is how optimistic, like the nicest thing about the movie feels too optimistic, which is that like nobody blows each other up,
Right.
which is just like hurts. But in terms of what questions are answered and not answered, what I do appreciate is obviously part of the theme of this film is that is that like the truth is ugly, sometimes, and like we said, like we don't have a backstory. Some just want to watch the world burn. And then what is explored in the second half of the movie is that is then hiding the truth. So in the same way Alfred hides the truth about Rachel from Bruce / Batman decides to hide the truth about Harvey from Gotham. And that's also really challenging and upsetting in a way where like I've always been a person where I'm like, everyone should know the truth about everything. That's just how the world should work. And this movie's like, but would people just be better? I mean, forget about Rachel and Bruce because like he'd get over it, but like the fact that basically if Gotham knew Harvey was this villain, they would just completely go to hell. Whereas if they can, and as we see in Dark Knight Rises, like 8 years of he is our hero, he is our white knight, and he hit the image, the legend of Harvey Dent has allowed us to be optimistic about the world and that kind of thing. But Batman is the bad guy, we're going to chase him. We don't like him. And the fact that the movie's just like, we need to lie to a society in order to bring about peace. And like, that's screwed up and sort of horrifying. But like the movie sells the hell out of it in a way that I'm not comfortable with.
Right. I mean, if it's commenting on politics and social issues, it's ultimately concluding the truth is so horrifying that we may need to actually essentially prop up a false like protagonist for society and also an antagonist and like have this myth to hold it all together because the truth is so horrifying.
Yeah. Well, and Nolan has always been interested in like storytelling, which is lying, right? Like that's the thing at the end of the day is that we tell stories because they make us feel better about the world, right? Like even if they have a downer ending or whatever, there's the narrative structure is designed to create closure and meaning, even if it's not a happy closure or meaning. And Nolan has always been in that, like all about you don't want to know the truth.
I was going to say we should mention patron exclusive episode for this month is The Prestige. We're going to have lots of thoughts about that. Check that out.
How about several magic tricks?
And so I really love that is being explored here, where, essentially what they decide to do is create a mythos around Harvey Dent as a hero, because it makes Gotham better. Like, believing in the stories that we tell makes us better people, and maybe that's why we tell them, and maybe that's why it's actually important to keep telling them. And also maybe there is no such thing as a hero, right? And we're all flawed, and like, that's not really pretty to hear, because I feel like that's kind of the Joker's point, but it's, as you say in the video, two sides of the same coin.
And I feel like it's, I think that's what lends the adultness to it, is that reality is complex, and sometimes we need lies or stories, whatever word we want to call them, to shape our belief systems. And sometimes it's better to have a good story to shape beliefs than the upsetting truth. And I feel like, if you look into any figure in history too deeply, it'll shatter very quickly the stories that have been created around them. And so I do think that's what's so fascinating about this movie, is that it's, as you're saying, Trisha, directly interfacing with that idea of what are the stories we tell ourselves. And if we can't always maybe know the truth, can we at least create the best stories possible to encourage the behavior that we all agree is the moral kind that we want?
Well, as Yuval Noah Harari says, the author of *Sapiens*, he says, society needs useful fictions.
Yeah.
What we need useful fictions that we can all kind of agree to believe in to just function, and kind of, we're all going to agree to this fiction and operate by that, so we can like have a cohesive anything.
Yeah. And I think thematically, ultimately, the movie does rebuke the Joker's point of view, where even though he did successfully turn Harvey Dent, and there's like much to do about how great he was. Everyone's like, he was the best of us.
Right.
Was he?
Right.
I mean, he's
fine.
threatening. He's like threatening people pretty quickly in the movie with death, like fairly early on.
Yeah.
Like just like in like it was like the second like main like assassination attempt. Harvey's like already kidnapping somebody and like torturing them.
That's another kind of like fundamental problem I have, is that I don't feel like Harvey is set up super clearly that I buy his deterioration into Two-Face, because it does happen pretty quickly once it starts.
Also, can we just talk about their choice to like make Two-Face essentially like half literal zombie, like flesh falling off,
like the
I mean, you have to play tribute to the character.
I mean, but like, is that how it always has been represented? Because wasn't there like the not
Batman Forever
version where it's
Tommy Lee Jones?
Yeah, Tommy Lee Jones.
It's like acid on his face or whatever.
Isn't it more like just heavily scarred? I think it's interesting. I like the visual they chose to go with. It's like really shocking and kind of cool. I just found it was interesting. More times I've rewatched it, the more I thought that the actors playing the scenes off of him were not told how shocking it was going to look, because people are surprised to see his face.
Right.
But like, if I saw somebody's face where like it's literally just muscle tissue and like bone, I wouldn't be able to like carry a normal conversation with them. I'd be like, get to a hospital immediately. I can't like what, how are you even walking around? Like,
I love the way his face is introduced in that scene with
Yes.
Gordon, where every time he starts to
scary.
turn, the camera cuts away, and then finally he like turns full. And I do love that it is this sort of like CG makeup hybrid, or it's like mostly CG, but I'm like, I don't even understand what I'm seeing and like how it was done, and I don't want to like look up some behind the scenes. I'd never want to know. I love how real it looks in like such an upsetting way. But I also think that part of the idea with Two-Face, usually as a comic character, is this thing happens to him and then he becomes like a crime boss. So he like makes the choice to go buy suits that are half and half and all this kind of stuff. But in order to sell that in this Nolan verse, you have to basically say half of him got completely burnt up and is horrifying, and like he just stayed that way because he's not going to go take a shower now. Like he's going to go on his,
Oh God, that was so painful just to visualize for a moment.
he drinks some juice, and
when he drinks that like
The
He drinks the
whiskey?
liquor. Doesn't he wipe off some
yeah,
flesh?
He does.
He like reveals some bone.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so gross.
It's super disturbing.
But basically just like what these villains are in this trilogy is sort of like Nolan saying, how can we make a realistic version of this comic character, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, I love the design of Two-Face. My point was, just really quickly, was that I think that ultimately the movie does rebuke the Joker, though, because the people on the ferry don't blow each other up. Like, I think that is where it kind of lands on, like, the Joker's point is, everyone could be as bad as me if you put on enough pressure. Like, an ordinary citizen will murder anybody anytime if you really pressure them correctly. Like, everyone is corruptible, even the incorruptible Harvey Dent. But he, like, targets Harvey Dent, and there's a lot that goes into, like, ultimately corrupting him, which is, like, maybe or maybe not believable. But the scenario on the ferry, I think, is where the movie lands thematically, ultimately, about, like, humans are capable of making a moral choice. We are capable of laying hold, even under extreme pressure, of, like, our better angels, right? Like, and I think, for me, when the Joker loses, it's not when he gets, strung up by his ankles, and outside of that building. It's when those ferries don't blow up. And so I think that, as dark as the ending is, it's not that dark. It's still this useful fiction.
Mm-hmm.
The meta disturbing thing is that that's the least realistic part of the movie.
Right.
In some ways. Like it's almost impossible to imagine that they would get away with the circumstances that allow those ferries not to blow up. Like that seems like a miracle, and not the logical outcome.
Like, I'm almost curious to, like, go around and, like, ask what you guys, like, what everyone would do given that situation.
Oh my
like,
God.
If you're on the
no,
ferry.
we are not going to do that.
All right, we're not going to do that.
It's way too dark.
Fine.
Channeling the Joker over there.
Yeah.
I thought Michael was about to say, like, so everyone look under your chairs right now.
Oh, dude.
There's a button.
Oh, God.
What? Because I agree where, like, it does feel very optimistic to me, and I kind of don't buy it. But the way I metagame, like, what I would do in that situation is, first of all, I would hope that I would just be a good person and not want to, blow up other people. And I think I love what, the one, inmate does ultimately.
The prisoner, yeah.
Yeah, where he takes it and he throws out the window. Like, this is what you should have done.
Remove it from the equation.
Like, you don't play the game. Like, that's the only way to win in a scenario like this is to not play.
Right.
And so I really like that. And I always believed, and I think what made that sequence so terrifying for me was that I really did think somebody was going to blow up the other person.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But the Joker, being the Joker, I assumed that actually they had the detonators for their own bombs or their own
too.
bombs.
Me too.
And I think on a meta level, that makes it that much more like you think it could happen, because that would also be a terrible outcome that the Joker would want.
Yes.
Which is another reason not to play the game and just throw it out the window.
Right.
You can't win. You can't know.
Although that's almost too much like the Joker, like, I'm going to teach them the lesson, where it's like the Joker's like not interested in teaching anyone a lesson. He's just interested.
Absolutely not. No.
Fair. Yeah.
Well, but the public would never know who pulled the trigger necessarily.
Right.
But I was going to say, I mean, that sequence in the first viewing where you don't know what's going to happen, like, is one of the most tense,
unbelievable,
like,
edge of your seat.
The music when, like, the dude on the passenger ferry is picking it up and, like, considering turning it. It's just like, because it's like, it's so much, like, there's so many superhero or blockbuster finales where it just, the outcome, they're going to win. It's just a matter of, like, when. And it was such an unnerving experience to be in a theater watching a blockbuster and have no freaking idea what's going to happen. Like, all the way up until, like, that's like the second to last scene of the movie, It's nuts.
I mean, the tension throughout this movie is absolutely unbearable. And a big part of that is the music too.
The music. Can we just, like, Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard?
Remember when two of our greatest composers ever just collaborated on this amazing score? Like, unreal.
The thing that I love is how much in this movie, especially, the music sounds like flapping. Like there's just this like
the bat wings. Yeah.
Like, you know, all this kind of stuff that I'm just like, oh man, it's so freaking good.
And that sound they got for the Joker, where it's just all they got to do is start that Joker cue.
Yeah.
And you're immediately tense, like, oh, something really bad's going to happen.
Right.
Like, that's all you need to know.
Combined with everything else, I mean, like, for me, I also can't get over the costume design. Like, the costume design of the Joker's costume is so ridiculous. Those purple gloves, like, is it the part where we get to talk about Heath Ledger now? Can we please talk about Heath Ledger now? Like, everything about the way it's like how he's costumed, it's how the character is designed, which is all incredible. His purple leather gloves are ridiculous. They're so cool. But also everything about the way that Heath Ledger embodies the character. I was watching it and pulling it apart this time. It's ridiculous. The way that he holds his body,
the way he moves,
so like loose and disjointed, where you feel like there's no structure to the Joker in the way that he stands or gestures or moves. And so like the scene where he goes to grab the champagne and he like sloshes all of it on the floor basically and then tries to drink out of the thing. You get the feeling that Heath Ledger, it was like because he was having the way that he had determined to like move his limbs, that just happened. Like there was this like, it's this loose kind of out of control movement in the way that he grabbed that glass, which is what resulted in that. I don't know, maybe he did it on purpose, but it's like every single time that he moves, it creates that disjointed, sort of unpredictable, but like his voice in this, how it's in this high register and then it drops down to the lowest thing. Just to terrify you.
Right.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Well, I love what he'll say, like, they'll cast you out like a leper. Like it's just this all over the place. Yeah.
How is it all? It's so spontaneous and it's so, I mean, it's like he embodied the idea of chaos in every aspect of his being, you know, in his body language, in his voice, and just like he is pure chaos in this film, like down to the cellular level, which is what a commitment to a role. I mean, it's just, it will always be legendary, you know, it's just.
It's towering, this performance.
Yeah.
There's this moment that I can't get over now, which is during the like amazing tunnel chase where they're down on the
lower levels,
lower fifth or whatever that's called, and they're moving Harvey Dent. They have the doors open on the side of the truck and they're handing Joker bigger and bigger guns to like shoot through the side. The way he holds those guns is so like they don't have any weight to them, almost the way that he's carrying them, where like he's shooting with this like, it's not even curiosity and it's not like bravado at all. It's almost like he couldn't care less about the fact that he's like firing at the side of this armored vehicle. And as they give him bigger and bigger guns, they don't feel any weightier. Like when they give him the bazooka, it seems like he's just, again, mildly curious about what might happen if he fires it. It doesn't have any like oomph to it in the way that we see every other actor handle a gun ever.
Well, because he's not worried about precision at all. It's just like, this is a machine that will send bullets that way. And like,
well, that opening scene in the bank, the way he shoots the final guy is kind of like he just flails his arm and like happens to hit him. Yeah.
But when he shoots the bazooka at the side of the thing, and then something explodes and something like flies past him. I think like a car flies past him, and he goes, like,
what's the Batmobile? I think
that's when the Batmobile like crushes the truck. Yeah.
It's, and you can hear that they turned that comment from Heath Ledger up in the mix, so we can hear this like, it's just very low key.
Yeah,
it's so brilliant. Like, can we do a 10-minute video that's like underrated moments of that performance? Because we very easily could.
Every moment,
right?
Which is every moment.
Yeah. This is just a fun little interjection where every time I watch that sequence, I remember I randomly was in Chicago doing a shoot, and we went out to get pizza, and there was like all these like big trucks around, and so we asked like the waiter person like, "What's going on?" And they're like, "Oh, they're shooting the new Batman here," and we're like, "Oh, wow." And so at like 3 a.m. we like went out and we're walking and there's those bridges in Chicago over the river thing, and so we went across, and then we could see underneath, and they were rehearsing like some of those moves for the car chase, and it was like we got to see the Batmobile, the Tumbler, like practicing to like drive up a ramp that was being like dragged behind Druggen. It's being druggen behind some other truck that I think is how they got it to do that jump that like catches the bazooka or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it was just like this like spontaneous, wild series of events that led us to spend hours at 3 a.m. in Chicago watching them like shoot that car chase sequence, and it was magical and just
That's
makes the whole
awesome.
thing that much more magical every time I see it.
That was also like that sequence in the film, like especially when in the IMAX screening,
Right?
Because that entire sequence is IMAX, and like when there's that first half with the tumbler and the bazooka and and then his tumbler is busted, and then one of the wheels pops out and it becomes a motorcycle, and it's like so freaking cool. Because I love,
so cool.
like, my favorite part of the Matrix Reloaded car chase is like the motorcycle stuff. There's something about motorcycle chases that I just find
They're
like,
just cooler.
It's like 2 times cooler than car chases.
Right.
Yeah.
Half the wheels, twice as cool.
And the way and like the way it even like the sequence ends, where like he flips this truck in the most satisfying way, and then
it's so
and then his
good.
like period at the end of the sentence is like, I'm gonna drive up this wall so I can turn around and like slam down facing the opposite direction. Like, it's the coolest like period at the end of a car chase.
It's really fun.
Well, and it's so great. You were mentioning the mix, Trisha, and so much of that sequence, they take out the music. Like after having the music there for so much, then
it's gone.
It's just gone, and it just makes it that much more intense, and the tension is that you don't feel safe. There's nothing telling you what's going to happen.
The sound
or how
design
you
in that
feel.
sequence is amazing.
Is amazing.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing about this sequence, which there's 2 lines in this movie that I've always been like obsessed with, which is at one point when Bruce is telling Lucius, like, I need you to do some cell phone stuff, some sonar stuff, like do it. And Lucius is like, why? And he says, I'm playing this one close to the chest. Then at the end of this sequence, Gordon shows up. Surprise, I'm not dead. And then Harvey says to Gordon, you do like to play things close to the chest. And I'm obsessed with those lines because I feel like it must have been a case of an intended callback that then got rejiggered in the script, where it was going to be the same 2 characters saying, those 2 lines to each other. And then like dialogue got moved around and scenes changed and whatever. And then now it feels like this callback to where 2 characters who didn't hear the first 2 characters say this are now responding to it, which is bizarre.
Gordon is playing things close to the chest, maybe without that phrase in the beginning, because he's not giving away the bank names that he once raided.
Right.
There's that one scene, but I don't think he says that term.
But it's the fact that one character says like, I'm playing this close to the chest, and the other character says, you do like to play things close to the chest. Like that thing that somebody said to somebody else that I wasn't in earshot of earlier, I agree with.
And I feel like this sequence also, we've just finished talking about how amazing it is. And I think it's also a perfect example of how this film is greater than the sum of its parts. Because also throughout that scene, you have annoying cop riding shotgun with Gordon.
So annoying.
Who's just like giving commentary about like, I didn't sign up for this. Air cav, that's what we need.
Oh, that's not good. That's not good.
Right. Like he's so annoying and so bad. And once the scene is over, I've erased him from my memory such that I'm surprised every time I watch it.
Me too. I was like, has this guy always been talking?
Was he added? But the other thing about this sequence is we talked last time about how Blade Runner was the movie that Nolan had everyone watch to sort of prepare for Batman Begins. And the movie for Dark Knight was Heat. And I just, again, really appreciate the sort of like, we are taking a different kind of genre, but we are applying sort of that designing principle to our movie. And weirdly, we'll talk about this more next week, but like weirdly, that was never released for Dark Knight Rises. If there was like the sort of one movie that they were like, we're going for this. But I just appreciate that Heat was, Heat and Michael Mann in general, he said, was like his inspiration for this. Is anybody bothered by changing aspect ratios?
So I am if they're changing too rapidly. I think it works when Nolan commits to like this scene is IMAX in its entirety. So like now you're going to be in IMAX land for a while.
Right.
But there are movies like Interstellar and it's a lot of other Christopher Nolan films where there'll be like these random shots interjected.
Right.
And it happens in Dark Knight as well, where it just goes to 2:3:5 aspect ratio for like a second and then back to IMAX.
Right.
And it's like, I get that that's what happened in the edit, but maybe in that case, like make a little portion of this all 2:3:5 and sacrifice
throw some
the
bars
IMAX.
on it.
Yeah,
Right.
it's like it's okay, to just like make it a bit of a smoother experience without like rapidly going back and forth. But I know in Interstellar, there's some scenes where
it's like cross-cutting,
and it doesn't even make sense that it's IMAX. It's like Jessica Chastain is inside her like vehicle in 2:3:5,
right.
and then we cut to outside the vehicle as she drives like through some corn, and that's
Right.
IMAX, and then back into the vehicle and it's 2:3:5, and it's like her driving through the corn isn't like IMAX worthy. Like that we don't need that part to be IMAX if it's the only shot in this sequence that is IMAX.
Well, and I do like in The Dark Knight that there's that one sequence that isn't actiony, like right. So after Rachel's died, and it's kind of doing that
Yeah.
like wrapping up. Maybe this is the end
Mhm.
of the movie feel that isn't IMAX, and it's just people in domestic spaces and Alfred burning the letter and stuff. That still has an emotional effect by switching to IMAX. So it doesn't just have to be epic things, but like be more choosy.
Right, because I think what's cool about it is it can be used as a storytelling tool, essentially, like in the example you just gave of, this is now, I don't know, kind of a more like meaningful or like pivotal sequence. Like this is the moment, everybody kind of like lean forward, pay attention. This is the big moment. But once again, if it's just, hey, we happen to get some of this B-roll in IMAX, so every time we use a piece of it, let's cut to it. That's where it bothers me.
Yeah, like Grand Budapest Hotel actually cuts between 3 different aspect ratios for the 3 different timelines that are existing in the movie. So it's like, okay, at least you're doing a storytelling thing with it.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason why it annoys me in particular is because a friend of mine has a projector screen that he built himself. It's like 97 inches or something. And he has like black masking on the top and bottom of it that he can just pick up and move, whether we're watching like a 186 movie or a
Wow.
This is a very specific problem.
Right. A 185 movie or a 235 movie. Which means that when you watch The Dark Knight, you have to have the whole thing in 185 and have like grayish lines because projector sends like white light, to the thing. So it's a specific problem, but it's also like when you go to a movie theater, they change the screen based on, like you watch the sort of masking come up or down based on the aspect ratio of the movie. So that means when you're watching a movie that changes aspect ratios, you're watching some percentage of the movie, often a high percentage of the movie in just like with just like bars that you're seeing for no reason. I don't know. Stop doing it, people.
The thing that I do love about Nolan's use of IMAX is that if you go see it in a proper IMAX theater, it is a special experience. And I just, my recommendation, because he's going to listen to us and our recommendations.
Yes, he definitely will.
My request and recommendation, Christopher Nolan, is that I love what you do with IMAX. Just please like commit, as we've been saying, and if it doesn't work out where you can use it consistently through a sequence, then like Michael said, throw some bars on it.
Right.
Well, and I think at the end of the day, the fact that this conversation is one that we are having and we are huge nerds, is the lesson is kind of most people don't care. Like truly.
Sure.
Most people, like your average moviegoer, is not going to really mind as long as you're telling a compelling story.
Even.
Like
right.
They might not even notice, truthfully. And I think that is something that Nolan knows well and is counting on, which is like the momentum of his films, particularly The Dark Knight, is going to overshadow any sort of like, it's not going to feel disjointed. You're along for the ride. Your average moviegoer is going to be way more hooked into the story and the characters and the themes than they are anything technical.
Mm-hmm.
Your average moviegoer is not a huge film nerd. They're not here to like marvel at the cinematography. Maybe they'll notice and appreciate like a great costume or a wonderful score. Like that's kind of the maximum thing that you can expect from like your average moviegoer. Different levels of film nerds like care about different things, but I'm a huge film nerd. And honestly, I'm willing to forgive a lot of technical stuff. Like technical choices that I may or may not agree with, technical choices that I may or may not even notice. And I'm here to forgive it if it is serving the story and characters, or at least not distracting from them.
Right.
And I definitely think that's the case here.
Yeah, I guess I'm not worried about the average moviegoer. I'm worried about the average film goer.
No!
Final thing, the voice. Let's just talk about the voice for a minute. Because
I'm not wearing hockey pads.
what was fascinating watching Batman Begins recently was seeing kind of the evolution of the voice. Because
Yeah,
in Batman
definitely.
Begins, even when he's in costume sometimes, he still kind of like tries to sound menacing, but he's not always in like extreme gravelly intensity, except for when he's like threatening someone. Like when he's holding the guy upside down and threatening him, he's like full on, swear to me.
Yeah.
But in The Dark Knight, they kind of made the choice of like, no, that is like the always on voice. With like when you're a Batman, your voice stays in this zone, which is a problem, I think, later in the film when he has like some long lines of dialogue to deliver, like like complex thoughts that have to be delivered in this like incredibly like
gravelly
this
Batman.
like difficult voice to maintain. So he's like, the people of Gotham just showed you how alone you really are. Like I guess you can hear Christian Bale have to like pause to like take a breath to like finish the sentence because he's like so much is going into every part of the sentence, and so there's some parts later on, like in the very end of the movie, when they're standing over like Harvey Two-Face, like he has to like say very long statements that are kind of like, this is the end of the movie. This is like the point of everything.
Right.
And I wish they could just let him be a person. Like,
No.
like you're with the person you trust the most now. Like you're with Commissioner Gordon. Like, mask your voice a little bit, maybe, but does it have to be? I feel like it actually takes away from the power of what the line would be if you could have just said it without like the turned up to 11.
Alex,
Yeah.
Christian Bale has a weird mouth. And if Batman just spoke like Christian Bale, everyone would be like, oh, it's Bruce Wayne.
Well, and in that moment, it doesn't help that it's like he's been stabbed, he's injured, he's exhausted, and it's a very dark. So like all you can really do is like look at his mouth, and like so. I feel like there's just a lot of things working against him in that particular moment.
I do think part of the thing, and you talked about this in the last podcast that we did, Alex, part of the thing that makes Bruce Wayne feel lost in this is that he's in the Batman suit for like, I don't know, it feels like 90% of this movie.
Right.
And so we don't get to see his eyes very much or his face really. Like he does a couple of Bruce Wayne things, but he's really in the suit for the bulk of this movie. And it's not just that like his performance is being covered up by the mask or that he's disguising and doing the Batman voice, which is distracting. It's that also it literally masks his vulnerability that I think we need from our heroes.
Right.
Where imagine like the end of any other action movie. After the final battle, we see how weakened the hero is. The hero is bleeding. The hero is hurt. Like, even thinking back to like Avengers movies at the end of like the first Avengers, people are hurt. There are consequences. Like they're fine essentially. Like Iron Man falls down out of the portal at the end of the first Avengers movie. But like his suit's kind of broken. He's unconscious. He's hurt. He's bleeding. Heroes have blood on their faces. And even though Batman falls off like a 4-story building or whatever, and there for a second, he's like, is Batman okay? And then he gets up and he is okay. But we don't see the weakness manifest because of the way that he's costumed.
Right.
And I think it does steal some of our relationship with the character or the way that we sympathize with the character because there's a human in there, but it's a little bit hard to see just because of the nature of the bat suit.
Right. Yeah, it would be like Iron Man if we didn't have the inside the helmet shots.
Yeah.
Which are like, oh, we get to see Robert Downey Jr.'s face now, and it's like if Batman suddenly like, I really miss my parents, it would be like, that's not, I don't sympathize with you at this moment. Yeah.
Exactly. And when we were talking about Civil War, we talked about that moment where Iron Man gets half his face like mask ripped off. And we see how vulnerable he really, like Tony Stark really is inside of his suit. And so I think there's a lot of reasons that the character of Bruce Wayne gets overshadowed in this entry into the franchise. And it's this. And so it's just the nature of the bat suit, I guess, is one of them as well. In addition to obviously Heath Ledger's insane performance that is just like it's unbelievable. But and all of the other, like, you know, this is a movie and a half, so there's a ton of plot in it. It's got this intense structure where it never lets up. All the stuff that we've been talking about. In addition to, there's not a lot of an arc for Bruce Wayne. He's like puzzling out a mystery, but he's not really like searching his soul. It doesn't feel like in the same way. They try to do it where he's like, what can you endure? What can Bruce Wayne? Well, Batman has no limitations. They like try to do it, but we already know there's not an arc in the sense that we know what Batman is fighting for. And it's not like he's fighting for something different by the end, or it's not like he's necessarily discovered something different about himself by the end. He's accomplished his goal. It's not the same quite as a character arc.
Well, I guess one thing I would say about that is he is positioned in the first half of the film as wanting to retire, but the Batman, you know, character. I mean,
so he can be with Rachel.
Yeah. And that's also kind of a problem. Is just like there are few scenes together. There's not amazing chemistry happening, so you don't have that like deep want and desire for them to be together. At least I don't. Watching this film, I'm not really like watching to see if they're going to end up together. So
there's a few missed opportunities here in the writing of Rachel Dawes, which I'm not gonna I'm not gonna go on a rant about it, but you know, just thinking about all the marvelous agencies she had as a character at the beginning of Batman Begins, before they knock her unconscious twice and are like, you're done fighting crime now. And anyway, but that in this movie, there's just, they do virtually, like, she hardly gets to make any choices. Like, her choice is, are you going to marry Harvey Dent? That's kind of her only choice in the entire thing, which is like, okay, that's a choice that potentially would affect Batman if he ever knew about it, but he never does. So what choices are you giving Rachel Dawes in this? Actually, the one choice she does make that is awesome is when she steps out of the crowd in Bruce's fundraiser and says, okay, stop to the Joker.
Yeah.
Which is the raddest moment for her character. And Maggie Gyllenhaal's performance in that scene where the Joker has her face.
So good.
And she's like trying not to look at him. And her eyes are like rolling up because she's trying to like pull her face out of his hand is so disturbing and amazing. Like, she's awesome in that.
Yeah. That's also a scene where I think, because for obvious reasons, they weren't able to do like voiceover ADR for some of the scenes with the Joker. They had to use production audio. And I feel like you can really feel the production audio where you can feel people like shifting and somebody drops something in the background and there's like coughing. And I feel like they just kind of leaned into it in the sound design to
make
it
it better.
That much more tense. And then, yes, like you're saying, Trisha, like Maggie Gyllenhaal's performance in that is so good.
It's so raw.
That moment is
I mean, it does end up ultimately being a plot device because she is no longer actually fighting crime like she was in Batman Begins. They have to put her into the path of the Joker. So they give her this choice, which does make her character cool, but ultimately is a device to put her into the path of the Joker. Because otherwise she would absolutely not be in his crosshairs at all, except maybe as the girlfriend of Harvey Dent. I don't know.
I mean, she's like in court with him and she's like interrogating people. I don't think they like take away all of her. She is not doing it in the second half of the movie, but she's trying to. She's like in the office with the papers and he's like, go home, it's too dangerous.
I really do like her vest in those scenes.
It's a cool
She's
vest.
got a great vest.
There you go.
She wears a vest.
For as much as I like how much Nolan took from Michael Mann for this movie, maybe the one thing he shouldn't have taken was like, women don't matter. They don't really exist or need to be in my movies.
Yeah. And you guys are going to get to talk about The Dark Knight Rises, which, I'm very sad to say that I won't be here for that, but it's going to be a wonderful podcast.
We will have a guest.
We have a special guest.
You guys are having a guest. I know.
But sad to not hear, because like, oh my God, there's so many things
There's so many
I still want a
things.
patron exclusive Trisha rant.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, well, and so like again, there's so much to talk about with The Dark Knight. We've been talking for a long time. I feel like there's still some like the first 40 minutes of this movie are like a different movie where he's like he goes to
Hong Kong.
And there's like the Mission Impossible 3 sequence where he's like jumping.
It's Mission Impossible.
Just like straight Mission Impossible.
Well, just like Mission Impossible, the midpoint of this movie is sort of a heist to like just like Fallout, like to get a character. Yeah.
So they stole from MI3 and then Fallout stole from them.
Yeah. Oh god. Yeah, that's right. I forgot Fallout, where it's literally. Oh god.
It's like literally like a SWAT van underneath the bridge by the water. Yeah.
Right. It's the whole.
It's crazy to me for as much as they make about Mr. Lau in the first half of this movie, or like the first third of this movie. He dies sitting on top of that giant pile of money, and they don't even show a shot of it.
Right.
I wasn't even like sure if he died because like, but I guess he's still up there. So
right.
He's sitting on top of this mountain of money, which the Joker is going to burn, and he's been a huge character up until this point. And when the Joker like goes to get him in jail, they're like, no one can protect him in here. And sure enough, you can't because the Joker's going to get him out of there. And then he's like in a very wide shot on top of that pile of money. The Joker sets it on fire, which we get an angle of from the bottom of the pyramid of money. And then we never cut to Mr. Lau ever.
We don't even hear like the screams of a burning person.
Too much? I don't know.
No, you don't.
I really want, the last thing I'll say is I really want a prequel to this where we get to see Alfred's previous life where he was like looking for criminals in Burma and burning down forests. Like
listen,
are you what?
I saw a child play with a ruby the size of a tangerine. All right, and some men just want to watch the world burn.
It's like, what was his previous life that he has this experience?
And now he's a butler.
You know, there's a series called Pennyworth, right? It's all an Alfred prequel.
No, I did not know that.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
You can watch that right now.
Okay.
I just want the Nolan version of it, though. Like, and the Michael Caine version of it.
I love Michael Caine's dadness. He's like,
a very nice man told me that he could have these shipped out tomorrow and he could, they'll pay cash. It's fine.
And we still haven't talked about Michael Caine. We did this in the Batman Begins.
He's so perfect.
Can you talk about it to death, please, in The Dark Knight Rises?
Yeah. We're going to talk about The Prestige also for the Patreon exclusive. So there's plenty of Michael Caine too.
I get to talk about him in The Prestige. Okay, great.
I was going to say, I like how that scene concludes. This is the final thing about this scene. That scene concludes like very abruptly with him just saying like, we burned the forest down. And which I just made me think like, so like, was that worth it? You like burned like a rainforest to stop a dude who was like stealing some rubies? like that makes me like kind of question you, Michael Caine. Like, what?
I don't think you understand. They were the size of a tangerine.
Well, it's an interesting choice of word.
I mean, I get the like idea that you have to like burn everything down to stop the bad guy, but
if what the bad guy wants is to watch the world burn,
right?
Wouldn't he be excited about the fact that you burned the forest down?
I think that's a cautionary. I feel like the end of the story is a cautionary. I don't know, when Christopher Nolan does the prequel series with Michael Caine doing motion capture for a weird CG version of a younger him, we'll get all the answers. And the climax will be watching the rainforest burn.
Guys, I'm upset. I really want to rewatch Lord of the Rings, but ever since we set this Patreon goal, where once we hit 500 patrons, we'll do 3 Lord of the Rings episodes and a Patreon exclusive episode on The Hobbit, I decided I should wait and hold off until we hit our goal. So I need your help, listener. We're about 3/4 of the way there, which means we're tiptoeing past the Black Gate and making our way to the secret stairs of Cirith Ungol. So it's up to you to help us fight off the big freaking spider, make our way through a sea of orcs, do a little dance with Gollum, and drop this thing in the fires of Mount Doom once and for all.
I knew what every term he just said meant.
I saw your face light up. It was so adorable.
I want to watch the movie now.
I'm speechless, and I'm with you. I want to watch these movies so badly. Please hurry up, Patreon.
If I don't rewatch these movies, I really won't have any idea what any of that meant.
Why didn't the birds just fly them there?
They're eagles.
I can't wait to talk to you guys about that on this podcast.
Eagles are birds.
They do what they want.
Awesome. So why don't we go around and talk about what lessons we're taking away from The Dark Knight. Brian, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Alex talks about how he likes when movies make it difficult for the protagonist. And I like that this movie makes it difficult for the audience, which we've spoken about plenty. But just like No Country for Old Men, it's this sort of feeling of things aren't cut and dry and easy. Real life has people who kill for no reason, people who die for no reason. Like, it's just, that's the way the world works. And granted, we don't want too much real life in our drama, and I think that's what, as you were saying earlier, Trisha, it's like we go to movies to like forget about real life, and to like escape a little bit. The fact that a superhero film of all things can grapple with that truth and truly not let us off the hook by explaining a villain's backstory, or conveniently making it so the villain never actually kills anybody, but we just know he's a bad guy, or like we hear about someone he kills but we never see, or whatever, the sort of PG version of that. And Dark Knight is PG-13, which seems so weird to me, that like they're like, we can't say like the F word, but we can show just like the most upsetting things in a movie, and like that's PG-13, it's fine. But yeah, I just appreciate like how, as we talked about most of this episode, just how hard this movie goes with just saying like, look, this is how the world is, and it's more valuable maybe for us to put that out there and to deal with it than it is to just spend 2.5 hours ignoring that this is the way life is.
Yeah.
Somber.
Yep. I know.
That's what gives it a little bit of that film in there. Trisha, lesson.
I want to talk about, just for a second, about the 3 different explanations that we hear. We actually only hear 2 different explanations about the Joker's scars that we hear from the character in this movie. And I think it really speaks to the power of, like, don't tell, basically, or don't explain. This idea that something that is unknown to us is often like scarier or more disturbing. And this movie embodies that in a few different ways. Like when we think about the most upsetting sort of things in it, and part of it is because it's PG-13, but just tacking onto what you were saying, Brian, like the things that upset me the most are things that I never really see. Like that scene with the tryouts where he like smashes the pool cue in half and like throws the thing on the ground. We don't see what happens at the end of that scene, but we don't need to. And in fact, earlier in that scene where he's got the knife in the gangster's mouth, right? And he's telling the story about what happened, one of his versions of the story about what happened to his face.
Right.
We don't see him like cut that guy's face, which we assume he does, or like kill him, whatever he does. It's over there. It's like the suggestion that something horrible
Hans
is
Zimmer
happening
tells you
without
that,
actually
yeah.
Right.
Sure, yeah, there's that
kunk
sound or whatever in the score, but I just think it's a good screenwriting lesson. Like, imply that something terrible happened. The different versions of the story are doing something thematic where we're talking about, does the truth really matter, or do you really want to know the truth? Right? That kind of question. Having the character offer different versions that tell us, okay, none of these is the truth, but in the middle of somewhere of all of them is the truth, is very instructive, I think, because even if you're not writing a character who's a liar, no one really is telling the exact truth. Thinking of that as like just a note for all characters, like don't let them tell you the exact truth, right? If they're describing an event in their past, it's going to be filtered through whatever they want you or don't want you to know about it. And at the same time, from a filmmaking point of view, sometimes we don't want to exactly see the truth. We'd rather imagine it.
There's minor spoiler for Last of Us Part 2. I won't actually get into details, but there's a moment where Ellie needs some information from somebody and you see her start to try to get it and she can't get it. And then basically we cut to a later scene where she then is with her friends again, her partner, and she just has complete like panic in her eyes and she says, I made her tell me. And like, you know what I mean? And like, that's so much more upsetting than if you had actually seen it happen. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's that 2+2 thing we talked about in the No Country for Old Men.
Right.
And yeah, I the fact that the Joker tells 2 different stories about his backstory and we're left to decide what of any of it is true is so much more telling, as you were saying, than actually giving those details. And I think about that every time. It's very, very smart.
Yeah.
Awesome. Alex?
Kind of on the same theme as you guys, I think the lesson I took away from this film is people are smart and they can enjoy a smart, complicated adult movie in large numbers.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
and I think part of why it works is because it's operating on different levels. Like you have the undeniable, just like gut level tension and fear and stakes, and there's those kind of gut level things that pull you through, even if you can't follow the convoluted mob like money racketeering
Stuff.
Like, you know, that's stuff that I only got in the second or third viewing, you know, if at all. You know, but you can have like essentially a kind of a complex crime drama, and people aren't going to tune out if the fundamentals are also there, that are why you watch a story, those gut level things. And so I think the lesson is that if you can provide that deep visceral experience, then like Christopher Nolan does this all the time. You know, Inception is a great example of this.
Yeah.
Then audiences will go with your overly convoluted, crazy, insane like story world. Like they can deal with it if you're pulling them through with an emotional, like gut level story.
Mhm.
So I would love to see more movies with lots of money and budgets attempt the Christopher Nolan thing, which is go for that story world that is maybe like it could be alienating to people who are looking for a very simple experience. Just go for it, because a lot of people want that. A lot of it's actually a broad desire for Inception type story worlds. It's not a niche thing.
Yeah,
so.
we like to be challenged.
Right, people like to be challenged.
We like challenging ideas.
Yeah, and I think Dark Knight is a perfect example of that. It's like one of the biggest blockbusters of all time. It's like a super adult, complicated story. It's not dumbed down in the least.
Yeah, it definitely does not feel like a kid's movie in the
No.
way that,
or even just like a broad blockbuster movie, you know, because you'll see movies that aren't meant for like kids necessarily, but they still feel like they've been oversimplified down just to get that mass market appeal. And I don't think people need that. I think people are smarter than that.
Well, and that kind of transitions into my lesson too, where I think coming off of The Dark Knight, first of all, every movie tried to be The Dark Knight and tried to copy the Joker, and there was just so much of that.
Catch the bad guy, put him in a glass cage. Yeah.
Right. But I feel like there's also this kind of simplification that happens when someone comes up with something unique. People kind of grab on to, well, what's the most obvious thing that's different? And then try to like copy paste that. And I think for The Dark Knight, it was this idea of like a dark superhero movie. And so I feel like, you know, not to start the ragging on the DC universe, but a lot of superhero films after that tried to be really dark in these kind of stylistic ways without bringing along these kind of more fundamental storytelling, thematic, challenging things that are actually what makes it disturbing. Like the cinematography and the style is there and amplifies it, but it's the situations, the choices, and the genius design of the antagonist, which like the Joker's just too good. You can't recreate the Joker. Like he's so good. So I think that's just an observation. And I think, of course, my lesson has to be about designing the antagonist. And this film is such a great, it lays bare all these things that like in a perfect world, you could have an antagonist that is like disrupting the story world thematically and attacking the weaknesses of your protagonist and competing for the same goal, like all the things that are in the video. I think it's a really fun movie to have as an example of if your antagonist can be doing some of these things, you're probably on the right track, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, to really quick go over what you're saying about like the copycat thing. I think it's so bizarre. I understand studios are like trying to get money. They're trying to capitalize off like a whatever's popular kind of thing. But I just think it's so bizarre that 9 times out of 10, the thing that becomes the big exciting thing, it's exciting because it's new, because we haven't seen it.
Right.
And then the studios are like, well, let's just do what they did, but again. And it's like, but if the Lego movie was exciting, the Emoji movie is not going to do that same thing. Like it doesn't work that way. You can't just say they did something fresh and original. Let's do it now again.
Yeah.
Like that's completely against the freaking logic of it. But yeah, that's a whole other episode.
Yeah. But to kind of transition to the what are we watching, I can do a little handoff here where one of the things I love about the Joker is that he takes literal psychological, experiments like the prisoner's dilemma and makes that part of his evil plan. So it's literally taking these impossible situations and making the protagonist have to choose, and that's just immediately compelling. And I recently listened to a podcast. I've been doing a lot of podcast talking or recommendations recently. I have been watching movies, but this one connects, so I'm going to this is my last podcast one, where it was a Radio Lab called Tit for Tat that is about the prisoner's dilemma. So, there are these two bank robbers, hypothetically, that get arrested. If neither one of them rats on the other, they both go away for 6 months. If one of them rats, then the one that rats gets 0 time in prison and the other gets 10 years in prison. So there's this like high incentive to rat on the other or blow up the other ferry, as it were.
Right.
And so what's interesting about this episode is they talk about in the 60s, I think the late 60s, this computer programmer had a competition, basically, where he asked people to write computer programs, basically simple algorithms that would play each other in this prisoner's dilemma. And then they ranked what was the most successful approach to the prisoner's dilemma, just kind of in a fundamental like evolution way. Like if you're always going to do one thing or follow one set of rules, if you're in this prisoner's dilemma, what is the best thing as far as like minimal time served for everybody? And it's really interesting. I'm not going to give away what happens because you need to listen to it.
After all that.
How dare.
But it's really, it's a really fascinating kind of, it forces you to think about what do we think about it as humans and morality and our society, and what is a purely objective take on it, and how do you feel about the technique that is the one that is the optimal. So everyone go listen to it and let me know what you think.
Interesting.
Trisha, what have you been watching?
I watched a lovely documentary from last year, from 2019, called The Booksellers. Directed and edited by D.W. Young, who's a documentarian that's done a few other things that you can look up. I really, really like this. It's about rare and antiquarian book dealers, and kind of about how like changing technology and like perception of books has changed their business. And it's all in New York, so it's all very specifically like kind of this one circle of book dealers who like sort of all know each other. And, a lot of them are like older people who have been in the business a really long time. But it's really, really fascinating and just kind of lovely look at people who think about the object of the book quite a lot and like what it means to us as a society, and like historically how books have been valued or not valued in different by different generations and in different times, and like what books sort of represent to us psychologically. And like it's really, really fascinating. It's great. It was produced by Parker Posey, who I really love, who does some narrating in it. And there's a like recurring series of interviews with Fran Lebowitz, who's just she's the best part of it. She's hilarious and awesome. But then, just tons of interviews. It's really well put together. Tons of interviews with like these book dealers, and just kind of interesting to think about what's going to happen with all of our books. Like, and they have a ton of amazing interviews with Susan Orlean as well, who is like,
her Twitter game has been pretty amazing lately.
Susan Orlean, God bless. Anyway, it's great. It's called The Booksellers, so you can check it out.
Sounds really interesting. It does. I do feel like I have an emotional reaction to like the symbol of a book that feels like reptilian brain almost, but that doesn't make sense because we didn't have that when we were. So yeah, that sounds really interesting. Brian, what have you been watching?
Well, something I think about a lot is what's my favorite Ian Holm, Chris Tucker movie? And I think it's probably The Fifth Element, which also happens to be the only one.
Well played.
Now, I recently did a little Luc Besson 90s double feature of The Fifth Element and Leon Cohen, The Professional.
Of course.
I also love The Messenger, the story of Joan of Arc, but I did not rewatch that, or have not yet, let's say. But just these movies are wonderful. Both have Gary Oldman villains. Speaking of Dark Knight, also
What a joy he
Tiny
is.
Lister, who plays the prisoner who throws the thing out the window, is the president in Fifth Element, and he's great. And it's amazing that these two movies were made back to back by the same filmmaker because they're so damn different. I think that Fifth Element holds up as just one of the most fun movies to just throw on, and every moment is just a joy and just crazy and silly and hilarious and a good time.
Mm-hmm.
And then The Professional is just still one of the best movies ever. I think it's so good. It's like also one of those movies that's like a little upsetting and deals with things that you're like, I'm not comfortable with this, but
Yep.
but yeah, I mean, Natalie Portman is amazing in it at like
Yeah.
12 or however old she was at the time, and Jean Reno is fantastic, and you've got little Danny
Always.
Aiello, and then of course, like I said, just Gary Oldman is a villain. Like, that's why I love Book of Eli. I don't care, you can come at me, but like Gary Oldman as a villain is just makes every movie great. So yeah, if you haven't watched The Fifth Element or The Professional in a long time,
What
it's
are you
time.
doing if you
Yeah.
haven't watched those? Yeah.
Cool. Alex, what have you been watching?
I'm finally checking out Avatar: The Last Airbender. This is on
Nice.
Netflix.
Oh.
And
Woohoo.
we've had a lot of viewers, listeners of LFTS and the podcast kind of requested as a thing to talk about. And I've also just heard from friends. And I was actually doing an outdoor film shoot earlier this week with a bunch of Gen Z actors.
Wow.
And they were literally going around like talking about what kind of like, would you be like a firebender or a waterbender, or like which character would you be? Like that was like one of their like, we're going to get to know each other kind of things, because they'd all like grown up with Avatar: The Last Airbender. Like I guess in 2007, if you were watching Nickelodeon, we were probably watching it. So it's like really, it's a cultural thing that I think maybe a lot of us like millennials and on aren't really plugged into, and I kind of just want to be now. And it's just so acclaimed, and I have no idea like what it is really. So anyway, all those reasons, I'm finally watching it. So far, it's like very charming. It's actually, I kind of thought because it's so acclaimed to be kind of self-serious or like on like a very serious cartoon, but it's got these kind of goofy, charming characters, and I'm not sure what to make of it so far. And it has, a few, there's 3 seasons, each have like 20 something episodes, so there's a lot to come. I'm just very curious to see where it goes and how it became this like cultural phenomenon. And there's a lot of chatter now about the live action remake at Netflix, which has some controversy now because the original creators have left, which is like, then I
Right.
guess don't make it. Like,
Right.
because
Yeah.
it's
Usually
like
not a good sign.
that's like a bad idea. Anyway, so yeah, I am intrigued. I'm enjoying it so far. It's very charming, and I'm curious to see where it goes next.
Yeah, well, you have
Nice.
to report back once it's all done.
Will do.
Awesome. Well, this has been our conversation on The Dark Knight. We'll be back next week talking about The Dark Knight Rises with a guest. It's going to be fun. And there is the patron exclusive episode coming on The Prestige. So lots of Christopher Nolan going around. Thank you, as always, to the patrons for making this show possible. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
The size of a tangerine.
Bye.